bingo cards, that you keep a bingo card by your computer, and if a dog barks, you get a square. If a child comes in the room, you get a square. If somebody says, "Can you hear me now?" you get a square.
Right.
It's funny. But the way the world changes.
Yeah, our meetings certainly look different than they did before.
They really do.
There's an appreciation I have, though, for the human aspect of this that's, now more prevalent than the formal settings may have offered originally.
My company, Keller Williams, is a massive training company disguised as a real estate firm, and one of the examples that they have used is that Google is trying to figure out how to take Microsoft out of the Office, the word processing spreadsheet software dominion that they've had. And the thinking was that it won't happen until there's a platform change. So the platform is changed from the PC to the cloud. And so that gives greater competitive opportunity. And the same thing has happened in real estate, where the platform is less likely to be an office on Main Street and much more likely to be a digital platform that is enhanced with a human interaction. But the transaction part of it is much simpler through a digital platform than jumping in your car and running 45 minutes across town to pick up a check. And so it's an interesting transition that we're going through, and Gary Keller's expectation was that it was going to be another 5 years before the industry made the change. In the last 5 weeks, the last 9 weeks, the industry has made a significant lurch toward a digital platform with a personal relationships on top of that. So it's an interesting change, and it raises the question about what is education, what is teaching and learning going to look like as we move forward.
Bill, Don, are you starting to see a softening of the market for offices?
Well, I'm in the residential side. So on the residential side, we're still going strong. Wake County detached homes in April, 1,445 were listed, 1,456 sold.
Wow.
So far in May, 1,090 have been listed as of this morning. 918 have sold. And I suspect that sold number will catch up before the end of the month. So it's still very active. Folks are moving here. Folks are wanting to move up. So it's still a very positive residential market. There is some expectation that coming out of the unemployment morass we're in will take some time, and ultimately the real estate may slow down, but we're not predicting it. But it would be a consequence of our total economic picture that's been in the last 40 years has been real estate hasn't escaped any of the dramatic shifts that we've seen over the last 40 years. So we'll see.
Yeah.
One thing just as employment, being the governmental center and with the higher ed as a major portion of our employment, we've had a very stable. We've had much less volatility in previous economic downturns than most other municipal areas. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing my best to help people solve their real estate problems. So education problems we get to talk about too, or challenges. They're not problems; they're challenges.
Opportunities, Bill.
Yeah, I have a word to share with you. If you're just frustrated with what someone asks you to do, the new word is fascinating. That's fascinating. You want me to price your house where? That's fascinating. Oh, me. Like, the county's going to do what to our budget? That's fascinating. Oh, me. I guess we're early. I know we're public and we're being streamed, so nothing untoward being said. Hey, Kathleen. That wasn't Kathleen. Yes, it was Kathleen. Christine. I said Christine, not Kathleen. Christine.
Bill. Hi, Bill. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. You have a purple haze about you today.
Well, I know I'm in a purplish room, I suppose.
Maybe you got a theme song.
I've got a lot of family in my house, and I'm trying to be in a corner.
You've been shuttered.
Keith, you look good.
Hey, Keith.
Well, thank you. Hey, Bill. Hey, Christine. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Good.
Does WebEx have the utility of putting a digital background behind the person that's on camera? Like Zoom does. Zoom, you can insert. You want to be in San Francisco, you can
Bill?
put in a picture of the bridge. Yeah. Hey, Lindsay.
Hey.
I don't know the answer to that, Bill.
Well, Tim or somebody in the handling the technology side of it might.
Might cost us more.
It actually is at the moment not available. We looked at that yesterday, in fact.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll use my coffee cup then.
That would be
we
a
go.
good background, Bill.
Yeah.
I'll have to get a photographer's drop cloth to go in the back.
Some of the real estate calls I'm on is interesting to see the different rooms that people put themselves in every morning. They're in a different place. We start laughing about it.
I know I've got some Raleigh backgrounds that would be fun.
Sure, absolutely.
If my lights are in anybody's eyes, just let me at least know that.
Well, it's not your light, Jonathan. That's the problem.
It's my bald head. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome. I share that. Although I got my lights in front of me. They're not on top.
Hey, we're glowing together, buddy.
Hey, is Ms. Johnson in the hospital? I'm seeing everyone except for Ms. Johnson in the hospital. Is she on? Okay. See her. All right, so good evening to everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. We will get started with our work session. So welcome to the work session of the Wake County Board of Education. Got a couple things on our agenda today to move forward. So again, welcome to all board members. Welcome to all that have tuned in to watch us virtually. I'm seeing about over 1,000, just 1,000 people in our attendees. So a lot of people are interested in what's happening today. So we'll get started. First item on our agenda is a presentation of a 7-year capital improvement plan. That's being presented by Don Hayden and Brian Roof. So, Mr. Hayden, I will turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, members of the board, Superintendent Moore. Don Hayden, Chief Facilities and Operations Officer. I'm going to introduce the topic, and then I'll turn it over to Brian Roof, who will present the details of the CIP. The agenda for today's regular board meeting includes a recommendation to approve the 7-year capital improvement plan, and also includes a resolution requesting that Wake County fund the 7-year plan. The CIP has been developed jointly by Wake County Schools and the Wake County staffs, and it's been revised recently to reflect the projected reduction in county tax revenue resulting from the COVID-19 shutdowns. I would point out that staff has been able so far to minimize the impact of the reduced funding on the projects, but that really any additional reductions in funding will probably necessitate delaying or even canceling some projects. To give a quick summary of the CIP as it stands today, fully funds construction of 8 new schools and renovation of 4, partially funds the construction of 9 new schools and additional renovations, provides for life cycle replacement of building systems and partial school renovations or improvements, funds purchase of computers and technology infrastructure, classroom furniture, activity buses, and other educational equipment. It purchases land for new schools, as well as sites for special schools or support facilities, provides funds for security and accessibility upgrades, provides funds for temporary classrooms to alleviate crowding, and funds the program management and oversight costs, as well as contingency for cost overruns. Point out that the total value of the 7-year capital improvement program will be $2,466,500,000 over the 7 years. So with that broad background, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. I'd like to go ahead and share my screen at this point and take us through our update here on our 2020 final capital improvement plan. Can everyone see the presentation that I have pulled up? Hopefully.
Yes, we can.
Great. So the purpose of today's presentation is to share with the board members and Wake County Public Schools leadership the final version of our 2020 capital improvement plan and is introduced. A quick summary of what we reviewed, again, the last time we met with our facility committee in March, just as a basis of where we started with this year's update. Originally, we were funding 17 new schools, whether full or impartial, and it's similarly full and partial funding of 9 existing schools. Program requirements as indicated, which we've shared in the last time we met in early May. The capital improvement plan at that time, the 7-year plan totaled roughly $2.5 billion. To recap what we shared the last time we met in our last work session, we had a request as we worked through our capital improvement plan and went through this year's update. And prepared to present that to the Board of Education, we received a request from the county to revisit our plan and look at areas we can make reductions. Again, this is the same slide we shared in our last meeting, so I won't take too much time here just to refresh your memories. The section in gray at the bottom of this particular slide indicated the original request that we had received in mid-April for reduction, which was $13 million in cash pay-go categories for fiscal years 21, 22, and 23. And then debt reduction of roughly $3.5 million and $5.1 million in fiscal years 22 and 23. The way we were going to accomplish that was a reduction in pay-go categories for technology devices, reducing those categories roughly $5 million per year for fiscal years 21, 22, and 23. And then a reduction in the SNAP category, a slight reduction, as you see there, to 13 million, 12.5, and then 15 in those 3 years as well. The program contingency and program management categories for fiscal year 22 and 23, which are solid yellow, are percentage based of the program costs, so those also had a reduction. The categories that are shaded orange and yellow do show a reduction in appropriation values for life cycle in the years 22 and 23 and land for 21 through 23. However, we were going to recover those reductions through savings. So while there is a reduced value in the total amount, we were going to, and still are going to be able to recover those to the original level shown by use of existing savings. So in early April, our 7-year plan had reduced from the 2.5 that you saw on the previous slide to the 2.46 here on this slide towards the bottom right-hand side. Moving forward, again, we visited this just briefly in our last work session, where we then received a request in early May, some additional reductions. Those additional reductions to our capital improvement plan. We met in early May at the board session. We had not had a chance yet to dive into this additional request, to meet with the CIP team, with internal groups within the district, and collect their feedback, and then ultimately with the core team. We've had some time to do that, and we'll share with you in just a moment what the additional reductions have resulted in. But I wanted to revisit this page just one last time to refresh our memories, where there was a pay-go reduction, an additional reduction of $3 million requested in 22 and 23, and then $5 million each in 24 and 25. The debt reduction was perhaps the most significant request we received. Within fiscal years 24 and 25, those blue sections up above, you'll see that there was a request to reduce debt by roughly $37 million. However, there was capacity in fiscal year 26 of roughly $50 million worth of debt. So we had an opportunity to take a look at making some adjustments, which I'll share with you in just a moment, to move $37 million out of those 2 years, but we had opportunity to recover it in 26. So moving forward, wanted to share with everyone now, we're moving into the final CIP summary, and there, I believe, is an attachment to the agenda item that has our entire capital improvement plan on one sheet. However, because it is so large, I've broken it into sections just to share with our team, and we'll walk through each one of these sections of our capital improvement. The first section here on this slide is related to our new school summary. You'll see here that in the final update to our capital improvement change, we have made no changes to new school plans. So the original capital improvement plan that was approved in 2019 has rolled forward to 2020. We have not delayed any project. We've adjusted project budgets accordingly to escalation and program standards, learning environment guidelines as well. One thing I will highlight for our board members and leadership, Apex Friendship Elementary School on the slide is highlighted in yellow. We wanted to represent that along with our capital improvement plan update that we've been going through. We've also had the opportunity to increase that school's program and modify that from a small elementary school to a large elementary school. So I did highlight that on here to draw attention to that. In addition, towards the bottom of the page, you'll see we have added 4 additional elementary schools in the later years of our program. One to be delivered, the funding for design in 24 and the funding for construction in fiscal year 27. That will provide an opening in additional seats in fiscal year 28. Because it's delivered outside of the 7-year program, we don't have that capacity shown here because those seats don't actually come online in this 7-year term. The last 3 projects on there include design appropriation and dollars for new elementary schools as well, although their construction funding lands outside the 7-year window this particular year. So moving forward, actually, I'm sorry, before I move forward, you'll also notice on here Fuquay-Varina Middle School. That originally started as a renovation project and was shown on the next slide in our renovation tabs. However, as we've brought to the facility committee and to the board, we've repositioned that project to utilize the M15 land bank site for Fuquay-Varina Middle School's new campus. So that's actually moved now from the renovation section of this program up to the new school summary. Moving to the renovation section of our plan. This is where you'll notice a change, and we've highlighted it accordingly. As I mentioned, Fuquay-Varina Middle School, which was originally here and intended to be in the renovation slot, has now moved up to the new school section based on its repositioning to the M15 site. That's one change, but still in our program. However, the one change I wanted to point out to the group, and it relates to that debt reduction request that we had in fiscal years 24 and 25 of $37 million. We've had to look at delaying the elementary school renovation #1 project. We've had to delay that by 2 years. So the construction funding has moved from fiscal year 24, where we needed to recover some debt, out to fiscal year 26, where we had capacity. In doing that, we had the chance to work collaboratively internally with a lot of stakeholders. I want to thank Wade Martin and his team in long-range planning and student choice and assignment for their work in evaluating needs and opportunities. There was a somewhat deep dive into movement or adjustments to various type of programs, be it elementary, middle, or high, and we considered new schools as well as renovations. And the outcome of all of that work resulted in a repositioning of elementary school renovation #1 from fiscal year 24 to 26. Moving forward, the other item I wanted to share with the group, the one last change as it pertains to the most recent update, again highlighted blue here, is the land section in fiscal year 24 and 25. As you recall, there was reduction needs in the cash fund lines as well. So we've made a reduction here, again in land for fiscal year 24 and 25. However, what you'll notice on this page, and it's boxed in blue down on program contingency. In fiscal year 22 and 23, we've reduced program contingency, not just by the percentage of natural reduction that comes with the reduced overall cost, but we've also reduced that by several $1,000,000, and that reduction is what we will utilize then to fund land to the original amount intended. So there's a lot of moving parts to this in terms of requests for reduction in cash and a request for reduction in debt. We've worked to meet those requests in the best possible manner with the least amount of impact, although there are impacts, as you've seen in this update. But we're also looking to utilize a balance of savings from previous projects and programs, and then offset of fund lines, for example, this program contingency, to keep certain other program requirements at a funding level that's necessary to meet the needs. So again, that is a brief recap of the CIP adjustments that we've made since we last shared this with everyone in early May. The final adjustments made based on the cash reduction from the county and the debt reduction. Next steps for our CIP group, we have the capital improvement plan resolution on the board meeting tonight. But behind this, we also have some work plan activities. With the impacts related to the funding reduction request, we had to refocus our attention to certain areas in reducing the capital improvement plan and focusing our conversations there. That has temporarily required us to pause the school prioritization rubric just to focus our attention. So we have some follow-up work behind our CIP update this year to do, which is the prioritization rubric, which we're looking to wrap up and bring to the board in this summer, along with print, our partial renovation and improvement category as well. We want to build and strengthen that prioritization rubric subject to the existing school prioritization rubric. A couple of other comments that we heard from board members that we want to ensure we put in on our work plan for this fall, reviewing the high school classroom standards and whether or not there are variations that should be applied to that. We heard that as a feedback in this year's update. We want to review child nutrition standards as well as part of our program guidelines. We're going to review the locker use. We heard that question from board members and leadership about the locker use and our design applications. The collaboration space use, we want to make sure that the spaces we've designed for collaboration are being used as intended, and to understand the value that our schools get out of that design and see if there's any further action necessary on that particular item. And then the last thing we'd like to do is obviously to collaborate with the district's sustainability plan. So as brief as I can make it, that's some of our updates to our capital improvement plan, why we've had some changes, what those changes look like, and some of our next steps. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Roof. That presentation, Ms. Kushner's had her hand raised for some time, so let me start with her.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you, Mr. Ruth and Mr. Hayden, for that summary. There's a lot in there, and I have a couple questions. I'm glad to see this work plan first and foremost, because that is a lot of issues that we have been raising. So I appreciate that you've been listening and we get a chance to have some input. So anxiously wait for us to start back up for Mr. Fletcher to have our facilities committee meet again. One question I have regarding the plan is just to raise a concern about the delay of a renovation of an elementary school. You know, looking back on West Millbrook and how that project had been continually delayed, and then I had a few elementary schools in my district that were getting continually delayed, and toward the end of being in those buildings, there were some significant issues that I think kept arising and got to a critical point. So I just would hope that we can be more nimble, and if there's a chance for us to fast track that and not delay a needed renovation, that we just keep on that so that we can make sure that doesn't happen again. Because in the end, it costs us money to have to fix a critical issue when we know we have a renovation coming. So we need to be very cognizant of those delays. And secondly, just if you could touch on some of the plans for getting ready for the reopening of schools. Do we have capital funding available to perhaps get ready for having hand sanitizer dispensers in our schools, to increase the cleaning, to do some facility work that is going to aid being much more conscious of public health and cleaning in our buildings? Can you speak to that for us? Thank you.
This is Don Hayden. We probably would not go to the capital budget for that kind of thing, but probably the business and operation budget. We are actively looking at the cleaning contracts for next year. We're getting to ready to award those. We'll be able to keep the 5-day-a-week cleaning going there. So we're looking at the supplies that we need to buy. So right now there's a lot of preparatory work determining what the physical school is going to look like and getting ready for the opening whenever that occurs.
And does that include hand sanitizer dispensers and perhaps some other items that are going to help our students and faculty protect themselves?
That's something we're going to determine is what are the appropriate provisions to make. So there's a multi-departmental, I guess I should say, effort within the district now to determine what that's going to look like exactly, and whether it's hand sanitizer or soaps. In addition, of course, we've been able to use the downtime to really deep clean the schools. So getting a head start on getting ready by ensuring that the buildings are clean when students and staff are able to get back in them. So we're getting caught up and getting way ahead in terms of cleaning and preparing.
Good, because I mean, I know there's a lot of sinks to be reviewed and to make sure they're in good working order. So as you said, we can make sure that students have access to, and faculty have access to working sinks with hot water and soap. Thanks so much. That's it for me, Chair Sun. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mr. Fletcher.
Well, before I ask my question, I think also, Ms. Kushner, that the district is waiting for and hungry for direction to come from DPI and the Department of Health and Human Services to clarify what the state's expectations will be when we open schools. And right now there are hundreds of different ideas that are being floated around, and folks are doing early pricing and different kinds of strategies. And we're really hopeful that the state makes some decisions this week would really be good to move so that we can make decisions and move forward. The challenge that I understand from talking with the administration is that we don't want to go down a path too far and then have the state say that's the wrong path, and of course they're not going to provide any more money to change the route we're on. So I'll just add that as context for the concerns about how are we going to make sure that students are able to maintain personal hygiene. How will teachers be able to do the same? How will we know whether students and adults entering the building have an abnormal temperature or not? And they're all hundreds of questions still being answered. So I appreciate your sensitivity to that.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Mr. Roof, my question, and you may not be the person to answer it, is what is the impact on students of the $5 million a year reduction in the tech infrastructure, in the tech device line budget? We've had to scrimp and scrape and borrow in order to put devices into students' hands in this time of creating a distance learning platform overnight, essentially. And the idea that we're going to be losing $15 million that was targeted for devices for both students and teachers is a concern. And do you know the answer to that question, or do we need to defer to someone else?
It's a great question, and it was a topic of discussion as we worked through the capital plan. In short, I do not have that specific answer, although I've written it down here and can certainly get a follow-up if there's not one available today to let you know.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Ruth,
And
Mr.
I would think Marlo Gaddis would have some thoughts
I'm
about
here.
that as well.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
hi,
here as well.
Marlo.
There you go. How are you?
Hi.
So thank you for the question. Certainly it's concerning, but we also recognize that cuts during this time are going to be coming from everywhere. So we are looking at what our vision is going forward. We're looking at how our current spending is happening, and then we're looking to see what other funding may be available. So we've got several things that we're looking at. Certainly, it's not my favorite to lose $15 million towards devices and infrastructure, But we will be designing a plan with what we have.
So this sounds like another situation where we're waiting on other people to make decisions about what resources might be available from different federal, state funds in order to continue to make some of this available.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'll come back and say we need the state to make some decisions, and the sooner the better. We don't need to wait till the end of June to be told what to do to open schools. So thank you.
Welcome.
Fletcher, this is Kathy Moore. If I could just add one more thing to what Marla just said, one more item. Given that there is some attention through some of the CARES funding to trying to provide some dollars for devices, we may have an opportunity there to recoup some. I don't think as much as what's been reduced, but we're looking at multiple opportunities. So just wanted you to be aware.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Dr. Martin.
Yes, thank you. I had the same question that Ms. Kushner asked about the capital for reopening, and I appreciate much of the response, but I am a little concerned about some of the facilities aspects of the reopening that we haven't talked about. You know, she noted the sinks, and we've got, anybody who's been to any of our schools knows that not all of them have sinks that function, but we need to make sure that they're in good shape. Likewise, you know, stall doors and restrooms, we need to make sure that, we need to figure out what to do with those. Actually, they need to be there, but what are the contact points? So there are going to need to be facilities dollars beyond just, you know, hand sanitizer, janitorial cleaning, et cetera. But my primary question relating to the CIP, I understand that we've had to work with the core team to try to come to some kind of an agreement, and I appreciate all of the work that has gone into that. My concern a little bit is thinking about the model to the decisions, because what we see in in this proposed CIP plan is cuts really through fiscal year 25. But so that's 5 years of cuts. We see no refresh. My concern is, what is the planning in the model for thinking about the recovery? You know, in the last recession, as we looked at the CIP and even operating budgets, it was pretty easy to make the argument that we had to cut because of the recession. And there's no question that that is going to be the case again with this COVID recession. But the 2008 recession was sort of formally over in about 2 years, but the school system never really got back to the pre-recession levels. So I guess I'm concerned we're not seeing anywhere in this model any recovery. It looks like that we're making all of the plans based on cuts. And again, we need to do that, and it's difficult to do that long term. That's the downside of our long range planning here. But I'm a little concerned that all we're seeing is cuts. The only thing that we're seeing at all that might be some recovery is that $50 million of debt capacity in fiscal year 26. And $50 million of debt capacity that far out doesn't give me a lot of confidence that we're looking at all at recovery. So it feels, at least from this point, that we're only addressing the cuts. So could you help us understand a little bit the modeling that is dealing with, okay, here's what we've got to deal with the next, in particular, 1 to 2 years, but hopefully 5 to 7 years out, we should have a model that we're rebuilding. So I'd love to understand how that gets worked into the formula.
Sure, and we have had some discussions about, as a part of the core team, about what our plans look like behind these impacts in related to a recovery. I'll tell you, in this last month and a half of discussions, obviously a lot of conversation has been pointed to the immediate impacts.
Sure.
But we've also had discussions that while this remains fluid both on the impacts, it also does to a degree on the recovery. And we have agreed as a core team, and the county has communicated with us that as we see, and I would fail to speak well on their behalf, I should mention that, but as we get better clarity on what the recovery looks like and what their funding models look like coming out of that, the recovery of events and tourism, that we'll come back and we'll come back to the table to revisit what that plan looks like. So I think from the fact that this is an annual update gives us that opportunity to stay somewhat current on a year-by-year basis. But I don't know that, I don't know. So we need to get into the conversation with the core team to understand when they have a stronger view of what the recovery is going to look like, to start talking about what the shape of that in the capital improvement plan looks like in the years down the road. I guess the short way to put that is we all shared the conversation, understanding that these later years still have the ability to ebb and flow and move, and some may be in a very, very positive way, or a positive way for us, but I don't think we know what that looks like yet today to include it into the model.
So I fully understand that, and I will vote in support of this. I wish we could maybe even have a little asterisk somewhere in this plan to say, this is going to be revisited, because like I don't want us to get caught in the same scenario that we were for the last recession.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up doing recession-related cuts for almost a decade, even when the recession was past. So I'd love to see us be a little more explicit that there's an expectation that, we're doing our part to try to deal with the acute recession, but we want to see real planning coming out the other side.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe there's an opportunity within a facilities committee meeting, maybe in the fall, when there's a little bit more distance from the immediate impact, where we can have maybe a joint presentation at the facilities committee to talk about what the model looks like, both short-term and long-term, when we have some better information on the long-term projection. And maybe we do that as a joint type of setting with our partners from the county, from the core team this fall, just to demonstrate that it continues to be something that is a focus of ours.
I think that'd be a great idea. Thanks.
Thank you both. Mrs. Cash.
Yes, thank you, Chair Sutton. First of all, thank you for this report, and Brian and Don, thank you. A quick question, and this may be very understandable by other board members, but since I've been happily awaiting for the rubric discussion, the prioritization rubric that we're going to be discussing in the summer of 2020 and the existing school prioritization rubric, what is the difference of those two?
Sure, that's a great question. I'm actually really, first let me say, Mrs. Cash, I'm really excited about the prioritization rubric. Our team has taken a deep dive into that. We've looked at educational adequacy and a whole lot of components that I think will strengthen what that rubric is and will be much more objective in its nature, and will peel back to a depth that I don't think we've gone before. And I'd also say that we're not too far from finishing it, although we had to pause it to get our focus here. So I'm excited about that. But to come back to your question specifically, so the existing prioritization rubric allows us to prioritize major renovation needs with all the schools in the district. So we're going to look at all the major campuses and all the renovation needs in a campus element. and that allows us to get to that renovation section of the capital plan. The prioritization rubric for PRIMP, which is partial renovation and improvement, needs to do something similar. It needs to give prioritization to some of the smaller individual needs. And what's happened in the past is those smaller individual needs, maybe it's a building at a campus, maybe it's an area of a building. Those individual needs have had to compete with the major campus needs. And so we've separated them with the two categories now, but we need to give a prioritization structure to PRIMP so that we can have the right type of allocation and sequence of projects. The PRIMP prioritization is sort of a second step behind the existing school, because we want to get the larger one set and be our baseline model. We may pull from that some of the same elements to PRIMP, but I imagine PRIMP may have some of its own unique categories or evaluation metrics that are different than the school prioritization. So 2 different fund lines, 2 improved models, one for the major renos, one for the small prints, and why those 2 are a little bit different. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, and I like that a lot. I like that look at detail, so I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Mr. Fletcher, did you have another question? Mr. Fletcher, you need to unmute your mic.
I wanted to just add some. I know Dr. Martin knows this, so I wanted to add it for context here. That contrary to what was in place prior to 2010, we had a different capital funding strategy agreement with the county, and we're in a 7-year rolling cycle, which requires us and allows us to go back and look at funding each year. So I'm less concerned about the fact that future revenues aren't projected at this point, although I know somewhere in the back room at the county they've had to do that just to look at their operating budget. Because we're going to be visiting this in a year from now. We also need to remember that the bottom line cost models are going to be buying less construction over the 7 years as the model is currently constructed. So that's another factor we need to look at as we engage with the county year after year to assure that the value of construction, which the cost of which will go up, but the needed construction will be funded through the 7-year plan. So we've got a couple of things to deal with on an ongoing basis, and I expect that working with the core team, which frankly I want to say the county has worked with us very closely in terms of our capital plan, and it's been a reasonably smooth process for the last several years. I expect that to continue. Mr. Roof's leadership of our team there has been good. I know Mr. Hayden has stepped into part of that role now. So, but I think those 2 things, the fact that it's a 7-year rolling plan that we review with the county on an annual basis, also allows us to review the funding strategy on an annual basis. And so I'm hopeful I'm looking forward to being able to have that conversation next spring, next winter, I guess, January.
And if I may, Bill, I completely agree with you. I just think it's really important to have that conversation early, that we are looking long-term, and the fluid needs to be not jumped down. So we're in agreement.
Thanks. Ms. Cass, did you have another question?
No, sorry.
Okay. No problem. It looks like there are no further questions. Mr. Hayden, Mr. Ruth, does that complete your presentation?
It does. I would like to close by just taking a moment to express my gratitude and appreciation to our capital improvement team. there's quite a few folks on that group who set aside time to join us and to dive into some of the challenging areas and the rewarding areas and help us build this model and update it yearly. And I'd like to thank the members of the core team. This year's update has been met with some new challenges that we've not experienced in the past, and our team members have stepped up and worked very collaboratively, not just to get to an outcome, but to work through it in a very methodical way. And I'd like to take a moment and thank all of those members. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Again, much appreciated, you and your staff and team, Mr. Hayden. Also, thank you for that presentation. All right, moving on to our next agenda item is the COVID-19 response update. This has been our bi-weekly presentation at each meeting, where we provide an update to the district work in response to the pandemic. Superintendent Moore, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce. So start with any opening thoughts and then turn it over to your team.
Good evening, Chair Sutton and board members. As Mr. Sutton has stated, we are going to provide some updates on some of the ongoing work of the district. We will close the COVID-19 update presentation with what I believe is the reason we have so many folks listening tonight, and that is an update on revisions to our 2020-2021 calendars. These are proposed revisions, I will say. The board would need to take action on June 2nd for changes. So we are bringing draft proposals when we get to that part of the presentation. The first part of the presentation is a graduation update, and so I will turn that over to Drew Cook and Brian Pittman.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and Superintendent Moore and members of the board. We do appreciate the opportunity again today to bring you a brief update on our ongoing efforts related to graduation 2020. As we indicated when we shared and discussed this topic with you in the work session 2 weeks ago, while we as a district and each of our schools are working to do everything that we can to honor the class of 2020, we do know and recognize that we'll never be able to fully replace all that has been lost for this special group of students over the past 2 months. That said, we are absolutely committed to finding appropriate ways to honor and recognize the class of 2020, both as a district and at each of our 34 high schools. As you know, over the course of several weeks now, we listened carefully to feedback from students, parents, and principals, and took into consideration the many phone calls, emails, and social media postings sharing ideas and thoughts on the subject. The result of those efforts is a plan for recognizing our graduates that we hope as much as is possible incorporates the wishes of graduates and their families while also responsibly maintaining public health and safety standards. So with us again to share a few more details on our plans is Senior Director of High School Programs, Mr. Brian Pittman. Mr. Pittman.
So Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, members of the board, it's my pleasure this afternoon to bring you an update on graduation. On Friday, May the 8th, the district shared information with our community that we were formally canceling our reservations at large-scale venues for our graduation ceremonies. While disappointing and heartbreaking, state and local restrictions and guidelines for social distancing make it impossible for events of that magnitude to move forward as planned as we have in the past. This afternoon, I'm here to bring you and share with you 3 parts of our plan for moving forward, including school-based celebrations focused on the unique needs and traditions of the school, virtual graduations, which will be provided collaboratively by the district and the school, and a look at potential future plans when state and local guidelines permit that. First, I'd like to share details about the school-based celebrations. These will be true celebrations organized by the principal and the school staff. At the center of these events will be the distribution of diplomas by the principal. Schools will work to incorporate music, fanfare, and other details in order to make this a joyful event. Students will hear their name called and will be able to be celebrated by their family and school staff. In many, but not all cases, students will be able to walk across the stage. School traditions like signing the bell tower at Broughton High, or the presentation of a rose to each graduate at Wake Young Women's Leadership Academy, or signing the Spirit Rock, or other similar school-based traditions, in many cases, will still be able to move forward for our seniors. Each celebration will be and should be unique to the school. Overall, our primary goal with this event is for graduates to leave their school one final time knowing that they feel valued by their school and celebrated for their accomplishments. We also want parents to leave this event having had that important moment where they are able to celebrate their student. In addition to this, we'll also be hosting district virtual graduation ceremonies. These will be broadcast between June the 8th and the 13th. For schools originally scheduled to participate in graduation in June, they will have their graduation air at the same time as the original ceremony. These ceremonies will include a welcome that includes the traditional pomp and circumstance, student speeches, principal comments and remarks. All student names will be called, while there is a slideshow that includes the student's photo, name, and notations about Latin honors, North Carolina scholar, and the such. And forgive my rough representation of that slide in the bottom corner of your presentation, but it does give you some sense of what the students will see on their slide. And then at the end, in the place of a recessional, there will be a montage of photographs sharing events that highlight that individual school's class of 2020. Between these two events, we hope to preserve as many of the traditions of the graduation ceremony as possible, a priority that was specifically called out by the students and parents when they provided feedback. Another priority that came in that feedback, particularly from our students, is the need to have some type of recognition of our seniors now and not to wait. Students expressed concern that waiting would mean that not all of their peers would be able to participate due to moving on to the military, the workforce, college, or other endeavors. And they felt it was critical that all students have the ability to be celebrated now, regardless of what we did later. Finally, our community has certainly asked us to consider having events to celebrate our senior class at later dates. We have heard this message clearly. We have not ruled out the option of future events and celebrations for the class of 2020 if and when current social distancing restrictions are eased or lifted by state and local health officials. I am not today going to rule specific events or ideas of how to do that as being either possible or impossible. Those are decisions that must wait for more information as our ever-changing situation evolves in the coming weeks and months. In summary, we look forward to celebrating the class of 2020. As Mr. Cook said a moment ago, while we'll do everything that we can to honor and celebrate them, we know that we'll never be able to replace what they have lost and what their families and loved ones have lost during this time of being able to celebrate them in the ways that we have and that they've looked forward to. Nevertheless, we'll continue to work to do what we can for the class of 2020 and their families. I will take a moment here to call out the extraordinary work being done by our high school principals, assistant principals, deans, counselors, and others to make these celebrations happen. These are people that I admire greatly and wanted to acknowledge just for a moment that the impossible task that they have been given, and yet somehow they are making it look effortless to pull off and do out of their love for their students. And that concludes my comments. I'm happy to accept feedback and or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman. Let me take a couple of questions now. Mrs. Scott, afternoon. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Chair Sutton. Mr. Pittman and Mr. Cook, I want to say a sincere thank you for your response to allowing and bringing the opportunity for students in schools to participate in these celebrations. We have seen principals in schools doing a lot of different things to honor their seniors already, And this guidance, I think, is what they needed and what our students needed. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate how challenging this has to have been and appreciate the opportunity for schools to personalize their ceremonies. So I know it has been, it's been extremely difficult, but I really do appreciate all that you're doing and leaving it open and giving more information out there. As soon as the announcement was made last week, I'm sure several board members all heard a number of thank yous. And I want to make sure that we give credit where that is due. And I do appreciate all the work and effort that you put into this. And that concludes my comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Mr. Hegarty, good afternoon to you. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Chris Haggerty, and I just want to echo what Ms. Scott has said herself. Mr. Pittman, this has been a colossal task, and I really want you to know how much we and the folks in the community that I've heard from really appreciate all that you've done trying to balance all the different demands that are out there with all the different restrictions that have been put upon us. It's difficult to give these seniors the recognition and the graduation that they deserve, but I know it's taken a lot of effort to go out there and collect all this feedback and to put all of these plans into progress. And I just really want you to know how much it's meant to so many families to hear this news. And again, just really appreciate your efforts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I too want to say thank you for the work going into some kind of recognition. It's extremely important for our seniors. My son is a college senior, so dealing with that as our family as well. So I know how important that is. The question I have is related to the safety and protocols for these events. I've received a couple reports of a few things happening at schools where personnel were not wearing masks or other PPE. There's a lot of controversy. I understand that, and though I don't understand why we don't wear masks to help protect other people. But can we at least have the guidelines go forward that all Wake County personnel will wear a mask? And what structures are we going to have in place to make sure that we have the at least 6 foot distancing? I think most of these activities will be outside, so that will help a lot. But I would like to see that we at least have a requirement that all Wake County personnel obey a pretty careful PPE protocol. So I'd like to hear what the plans are in that regard.
So, Dr. Martin, thank you. I do think that we've talked with the principals about observing the protocols and being models for the personal protective equipment as we do these events, and trying to be thoughtful about how to maintain social distance at these events, when the reality is that not only our students but our staff are excited to see each other and be around each other, and sometimes that excitement can certainly take over. So we've reviewed that. We've provided that as a district, not specifically related to graduation and these celebrations, but schools have received guidance about what are our protocols for that. In terms of the mask specifically, I think I would want to defer to others who have been working specifically on that health and well-being part of the PPE to answer that. But it is something that we have emphasized and certainly can continue to emphasize with our schools to be sure that we are being models of that personal protection and modeling some of those precautions as appropriate, and being sure we have structures in place to try to keep social distancing as it should be.
This is Ms. Moore. I'll just say that I'm pretty sure we sent that guidance to principals, but I'm going to check and make sure. And for the next principal webinar we'll reemphasize that again.
Well, I think it's pretty important that we have, and I appreciate that. I think it's pretty important that we have a consistent set of guidelines that needs to be communicated to the public as well. because there are expectations we want for people coming, but we also want to be very clear on the expectations we have for ourselves. And I think we have an obligation to go above and beyond to reassure people that we're paying attention to what we should be paying attention to. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hagerty, did you have another question?
No, sir, my apologies.
I do want to mention to folks that are watching and that are trying to get in, we are working with our virtual partner, Cisco WebEx, to be able to allow more participants to get in and understand that there are some who are experiencing some difficulty. We are just over at 1,000 people that are logged on. We should be able to handle more, but for some reason, folks have not been able to connect at this time, I understand. This session will be recorded and will be placed on the website immediately after the work session is over, so everyone will be able to get a chance to see this. We do apologize for those that are not able to log on at this time. We are working with them to correct that and hopefully be able to get you on the end. So with that, we'll continue. Mr. Pittman, that concludes your presentation. So we'll move on to our next presentation. I see that's Mr. Coe with food distribution updates.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and board members. I'm here again today to present to you some updates about our food distribution efforts. And to the date, as a collective effort that includes several partners, we've prepared over 1.1 million meals, distributed over 10,000 emergency food boxes, and since April 30th, we've provided 1,500 emergency meal bags. And again, I would like to express gratitude for the work of our child nutrition services team, our bus drivers, transportation team, our school social worker team, who are working daily to get meals out to as many families as possible in our county. In addition, this wouldn't be possible without our partners from Wake County Cooperative Extension, Interfaith Food Shuttle, and the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina. We want to say a big thank you to our partners, and also to our Western Region site partners, Overflowing Hands, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, and all the volunteers who have supported our work. Thank you for joining in this work to ensure food security and access in all of Wake County. In terms of our next steps for summer, we got some good news where we've received the necessary waivers as a collaborative team to continue distribution efforts until schools reopen. So those waivers were extended through August 31st, 2020. And in the meantime, in summer, we're assessing volunteer availability during summer so we can make sure that we're distributing as much as possible. We're also continuing to assess our school site and big bus food truck distribution for potential expansion. And we're also seeking out additional sponsored summer sites with Wake County Cooperative Extension to make sure that we're meeting the demands that we definitely see are increasing. And so with that, thank you again for your support, and now I'll pause for questions before I pass it to Tim Simmons.
Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. Mr. Coe, and I have to say thank you so much. I know I've been sending numerous emails over the last few months. Eastern Wake and Southeastern Wake, I mean, there are parts of Wake County that are a little bit more out there and a little bit more remote where we have houses in small neighborhoods. And you have been incredibly responsive to all of those and working very hard. So I want to make sure that I thank you for that. And you know how much I appreciate that. And I know the families do as well. And I have to give a shout out to Roxy Cash because she's been working really hard to personally step in and volunteer. And I know that Ms. Johnson-Hostler has also been personally volunteering as well in the community. I'm sure other board members have. I just know those two absolutely have been. And I want to say thank you. It means a lot. It just shows everybody's commitment to serving our community, and that's what we should do. So I wanted to make sure I thanked you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mrs. Cash.
Paul, thank you. I just want to tell you especially thank you. I've watched you work tirelessly on this, and Paula DeLuca, and I am just always impressed when I go to any site and I do nothing, but the CNS team is so, they are just so enthused and hardworking and smiling and encouraging to the parents that it's amazing to me. And Paul, you hit all the areas exactly right. So I want to say I appreciate you.
Thank you, Ms. Cash.
All right. Thank you for that. Seeing no other questions. The next item up is social media, connecting and celebrating. Tim Simmons, Chief Communications Officer.
Good afternoon, board members. You've probably likely noticed a little more than a month ago that we began to more aggressively incorporate social media into the mix of tools as we engage families across Wake County. Using a defined strategy on social media obviously fosters and strengthens relationships, both with our current families as well as our prospective families, which we always obviously have an eye toward. As you can see in the screenshots that are captured on this slide, we've seen some really incredible examples of schools using their online voice to highlight classroom activities, foster spirit, and showcase student achievements. The reason that this is so important is that obviously folks are craving connections with their school communities at a time where they're physically not able to. And so in working with the schools, as you can see here, there's some really wonderful examples, which we will continue on out through the remainder of this year and then move on into next year as we get ramped up for 2021. At the district level on the next slide, you can see that we've also used that digital voice to share critical updates as well as celebrate staff and families. There's several campaigns that I think are worth highlighting here, both for their the success that they've already had, as well as the success I anticipate that they will have going forward. The campaign #ThankAWCPSSTeacher celebrated teachers during Teacher Appreciation Week. The #WCPSS On With The Show highlights some of the incredible student performances that were put on pause due to the pandemic. The #WCPSS Hero spotlights staff members who are leading the way in serving students. I think the last time that I ran across that number, it was literally in the hundreds. We will never be able to highlight them all personally as we have done as many nominations as we have received. And then, of course, hashtags WCPSS Celebrate Seniors, as we've talked about as part of the graduation discussion, shares our pride in the historic class of 2020. So overall, the district is recording an average of about 60,000 daily impressions on Twitter and about 10,000 or so on Facebook. So it's obvious that the message is getting through to the groups that we're looking for. And in the process, the campaigns are helping to provide some sense of normalcy in what is obviously an abnormal period. So as we have transitioned from the crisis communication of that first month to once again using a broader range of tools, although obviously in a different environment, we anticipate that social media will remain a staple from here on out. In whatever environment we find ourselves, as I said, as we move out of this year and move into 2021, we intend to use it as a way to continue to maintain connections with families. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them now.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Ms. Kushner, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and thanks for that overview, Mr. Simmons. And it made me think, thank you for giving us an update on the impressions, and some schools are doing phenomenal work. I enjoyed watching the On With The Show, highlighting our art students in particular. But are we also monitoring to notice which schools might not be as active and giving some support, professional development, so that we have some schools that are not lagging behind and doing this sort of social media communication?
Yeah, as you well know, some schools are far more active than others in this particular area. We do work with schools individually, and then often, though, at the end of the day, it is obviously up to them to drive that community through that social media channel. But the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure that we're, proactively monitoring and to some extent just to make sure that we're helping those who might need a boost. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher. Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher, you need to unmute your mic, please, sir.
I'm sorry. I'm sitting here looking at my hand, and it says my hand's up, but my mic's not on. My bad. I just wanted to say, in an organization as large as ours, with so many people that we communicate with, if we just stay within staff, it'd be very easy for this department to send an email, that department to send an email, 2 or 3 more departments to send an email, and pretty soon everybody's just overwhelmed with email and communication stops. And I think Tim and the superintendent have very wisely put together a strategic time to communicate and to aggregate most of these departmental messages to our staff and ultimately to family and students. So there's not an overabundance of email, but there are clear communications with excellent content and resources for whatever the intended audience is, whether it's parents, staff, principals, etc. And I just think that's a little pat on the back for an appropriate internal strategy that I believe is also enhancing our communication. So thank you.
You're most welcome. The pat belongs to the communications team. They've done a tremendous job.
I would just echo that sentiment that, communication is always key, especially in a district and a community the size of ours. And so during this time that we are physically distant, we are trying to remain as close as possible, and over communication key. So hats off again to you and the work of your communications team in doing that, using all of the means that we have. Possible. Thank you. All right. Next up, after social media, calendar updates, 2021 year. Wade Martins, the superintendent for school choice planning and assignment, you're up. And again, I know that we have a number of folks that are tuning in for this particular update. Again, we will provide a written summary after today's work session, and that will be posted shortly. Those who have not been able to access this meeting. Mr. Martin.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, board members, and Superintendent Moore. I'm happy to join you today to provide the board with updates regarding staff's work on our 2020-21 school calendars. As you know, we all immediately following the notice of school closures for the current year, staff quickly worked to assemble a calendar committee to address the immediate need of developing a remote learning calendar that could support all of our schools until May 15th. By merging our traditional and year-round calendars. That remote learning calendar, as we all know now, has become the school calendar to close out our school year. With the passage of the recent updated legislation just a few weeks ago, we reconvened the calendar committee to address the session law updates that impact our 2020-21 calendars. The calendar committee is comprised of myself, area superintendents, human resource representatives, academic department representatives, and school principals representing our traditional, modified, multi-track year-round, single-track year-round, magnet, early college, and restart schools. It is really a comprehensive group. Our group has also been able to reach out to Kristen Beller with Wake NCAE for input from her group as they continue to work and support Wake County teachers. All drafts that we'll be reviewing today do meet our 1,025-hour instructional minimum, They incorporate all new session law requirements, and they do not exceed the 215 staff contractual days. New key requirements that are a part of the session law impacting our 2020-21 calendars include new language that defines year-round schools, and I will share a little bit more about the specifics of that when we review the draft multi-track year-round calendar. We must add 5 remote learning days to all calendars. We must meet the minimum 1,025 instructional hours that include the 5 remote learning days. We must add 5 additional separate and distinct full instructional days. We're referring to them as session law days into all calendars. And for our traditional schools, there must be 42 days between the close of our 1920 school year and the start of our 2021 school year. I will review each draft calendar to highlight the changes for the board. I believe that the draft calendars have been uploaded as backup material, so I hope that you're able to look at that calendar as I take the group through the changes with that calendar. For the draft traditional schools calendar, you can see that the first day of school is now August 17th, and this, as you know, is per the calendar law session. You can see that the 5 additional session law days in the gray shaded box designated as SL, and on this calendar, you'll see that they are the week of August 17th through the 21st. The 5 remote learning days are in the light green shaded boxes and are known as RL. In order to add the 5 session law days and not go beyond our 215 contractual staff days, the number of teacher workdays has been reduced from 17 to 12. Teacher workdays are shown as W in the orange shaded boxes on the traditional calendar. You can also see that our teacher workdays begin on August 13th. This is leaving only 2 workdays prior to the opening of school, and this is a result of the 42-day restriction between the close of this year and the beginning of next. And lastly, you can see 2 days in the shaded that are shaded in purple, shown as C. We're calling these calendar out days. These days will be similar to what we know as track out days in our multi-year or multi-track year-round calendars. Students and staff would not report to school on these days. So it's not like a work day because staff would not need to report. These days, you'll notice if you look at the section at the bottom of the calendar under our weather makeup days, these 2 days have been added as our first inclement weather days, as they can simply become regular instructional days without using bank time or teacher work days. Moving on to our draft 2021 modified calendar, you can see that the first day of school is now what we're recommending to be August 3rd. This is a change from the regular start, which is typically at the end of July. You can see that the 5 additional session law days are shaded in gray again with the SL designation. For this particular calendar, you'll notice that those session law days are at the end of the calendar, not at the beginning, because we've already compressed, we've already moved back their start date. The 5 remote learning days are shaded again in the light green boxes and are shown with an RL. And similar to our draft traditional calendar, the number of teacher workdays has been reduced from 17 to 12. Teacher workdays are shown in the W in the orange shaded boxes. And lastly, as I noted just a few moments ago, you will see that the last day of school is now on June 7th. Our modified calendar schools typically end their year right at the end of May because of their earlier start. Lastly, we will take a look at our draft 2020-21 multi-track year-round calendars. And before I review the specifics of the draft calendar, I would like to share with you at the top of this particular slide, you can see I've added a piece of the session law that applies to our particular draft. The entire definition is in section 2.1 of the new legislation. And in that legislation, it includes parts A, B, and C in the definition, and it specifically states that the school calendars must meet at least one of those defined parts. Our proposed multi-track year-round calendar meets part A, and that definition is a plan divided students into 4 groups, requiring each group to be in school for assigned and staggered quarters each calendar year, and the calendar year is defined as July 1 to June 30. So obviously, the first significant change that you will see is the start date. And really at this time, as has been highlighted in the earlier presentations as a part of the CIP and earlier in today's meeting, without clear guidance from the Department of Public Instruction, as well as the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services around what social distancing guidelines will be in July, knowing that they most likely will affect the number of people allowed in a building at one time, we are recommending moving the start date for our multi-track year-round schools to August 3rd. For each track of students, you will see the 5 additional days shown as SL during the first week of school. You will also see each track has the 5 remote learning days that are in light blue shaded days and are shown with the designation of RL. Of note, with our multi-track year-round draft calendar, all remote learning days occur during track out time, which would also be teacher work days. Should these days be designated as protected teacher work days by the school, synchronous remote learning can be facilitated in essence by all of our traditional modified and year-round calendars with this particular setup. Lastly, in order for our multi-track year-round schools to meet the 1,025-hour instructional hour minimum, as well as all of the other session law requirements, we are recommending that 15 minutes be added to the existing bell schedules. The calendar committee did consider a variety of options, 2 of them that would have required us to schedule 6 full regular school days on Saturdays, or risk reducing the number of scheduled days during holidays. The calendar committee believed that by extending the school day by 15 minutes would be significantly less disruptive to families and staff, and will provide a small amount of bank times as well. Our group has been in communication with Mr. Snidemiller in the Transportation Department, as we understand that there would be impacts, and we are working collaboratively with his group to mitigate the impacts to the other schools as a result of this recommended extension. At this time, we are not recommending any changes for our single track, year-round single track 4 school calendar. Single track year-round schools can plan to follow the proposed track 4 schedule while we conduct a further review of potential legislative action and DPI processes that could potentially impact this calendar. The committee is also finalizing alignments between our early college calendars with that include the new session law requirements and our university college partner calendars. As you can understand, with these respective schools, we have 2 groups of staff, Wake County staff, as well as the college and university partner supporting student learning. So we need to ensure that the selection of our remote learning days do not carry any negative impacts for our students. So we are working through that, and we hope to be bringing the board those updated drafts very soon. As I'm sure there may be questions, I would welcome any input or questions at this time.
Before questions get started, if I could just clarify and summarize a couple of points. I'm able to follow some of the questions that are being asked by our participants. So all of these calendars contain the same number of days for staff. 215 days is what staff are paid for. 215 days is what are in the calendars for staff. For year-round teachers or staff that are 11 and 12-month employees, we're still having to work on those calendars. We're not planning on changing anyone's days of employment or pay schedules, but we still have to do that work. Several parents have asked about where they can actually see the calendars. The calendars were not part of the presentation, but if you will go to the www.wcpss website and go under the section About Us and look at board meetings, you can see in the board meeting agenda for this item, there are 4 backup items that include the calendars that have been referenced. And if it'll be helpful, I think I can ask our staff to also just post them on the main website in some way, shape, or form so that people can see them rather than having to go into the Assembly website. So we'll get that in a way to make sure that the public can see it as well. I think that just a couple of other quick things. The number of days of instruction varies in the calendars here. And we are focused because WCPSS has been focused for a number of years now on ensuring that we have the 1,025 hours of instruction, however many days it takes to get that. And we've always had a few more hours than that, which was allowed us our banked time. The multi-track year-round calendars really were the most difficult to work through because there were no great options here. And I just need to say that. We do believe that it is important based on the current guidance that we have in the state and the phases that the governor has and not getting to phase 3 until the middle of July and that sort of thing. We felt that it was important to go ahead and make a decision that our multi-track year-round schools would not begin until August 3rd. We know that the guidance and the data is being reviewed every single day and that the state and local health officials are paying close attention to trends. And we will continue to be responsive as additional guidance and information comes out about the changes that are occurring. But we did feel that it was important to go ahead and apply the language of the calendar law to our calendars and go ahead and make revisions for next year that are in response to what's in the calendar law while also taking into account the safety and well-being of our students and our staff. So just wanted to provide sort of that summary and that background and maybe ask staff to make sure that we're taking a look at all of the questions that are being asked by the attendees so that we can provide some sort of an FAQ or something like that online. Thank you.
I've got a number of questions. I'm happy we haven't heard from you yet, so good afternoon to you, and we'll start with you.
Afternoon. Obviously, given all of the unknowns, this is the calendar that we're looking at, and year-round families were the ones that were contacting me as we're less than 2 months from what should be the start of the year-round calendar. I really appreciated the communication that went out yesterday to families regarding this work session. I'm curious if, given the, for lack of a better term, technical difficulties we had today, if an additional text message could go out linking to maybe a landing page with those calendars and even just segmenting to this part of the work session on YouTube, so that families who were unable to come to this meeting would be able to view it, because I know this has been something very much on everyone's minds, but even especially more so for those families that were curious whether school would begin in early July. Thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey, I don't want to, Mr. Martin here, I don't want to speak on behalf of Mr. Simmons and his team, but I do know that communication is planned and scheduled to go out this evening following today's work session with links to those draft calendars to all of our year-round families as well as the other traditional modified and non-year-round families. There's been a separate communication tailored for both to give them the updates regarding today's work session. So that will be going out this evening.
And if
Tim?
if I might, just so people understand the sequence, the message to families will go out shortly after this meeting concludes, and it will link to the calendars, as Dr. Martin just said. In addition, the recording we'll probably post to the YouTube channel, I would assume at some point tomorrow morning. It's a large file. It takes a while to upload. But at that point, people will be able to see the calendars. They'll be able to see the recording. They can cross-reference the entire discussion that we are having here.
Yeah, I think the recording, especially given all of the restrictions for our calendar law, our new remote learning days, I think is a great explanation rather than just looking at the calendar itself. So I appreciate that.
Yes, there'll be some frequently asked questions in the messaging that goes out to parents, but understand that there are a lot of questions in this area that are understandably unique and appropriately unique to the families, which is why the recording will be of value. But I think that this will allow people to access it at various levels beginning this evening.
Okay, and then as for feedback from families, are we asking them to message their board member if they have questions or concerns, or is there a way that they can, like through a feedback form as we've done in the past?
We do not have a feedback form set up, although we will have a Friday message that goes out as we have had the last few weeks, and that would be a logical place for us to both post these links again, as well as create a link, probably through Let's Talk, to provide feedback that's in one place so it doesn't get scattered.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Ms. Johnson-Hoskins, good afternoon to you.
To you as well. Tim, I know you know this, but I'd already put my hand up while Ms. Mahaffey was talking. If you will please also draw attention to those that are in single track 4. Oftentimes, many of our parents, if their school is only track 4, may not know to look in the multi-track year-round, and noting that their calendar will have the exact same modifications as track 4 as multi-year track year-round. So if you can please note that for our single track schools, I would have greatly appreciate that.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And Mr. Martin, I had a quick question on the original. This latest version does start our multi-track schools with tracks 1, 2, and 3. I think we saw an earlier draft that had track 4 starting, but so you're proposing that the multi-track start as it usually does with tracks 1, 2, and 3. Does that mean that the tracks are fairly aligned as they have been in the past?
Yes, in the updated draft that you see, throughout the course of the entire year, all 4 drafts have the equal number of instructional days. As the calendar committee worked through that, that was one of the priorities in establishing this, was to squeeze as many days out of that window of time, but still giving all students the same access in terms of instructional hours and engagement with face-to-face learning with their teachers.
And although we've lost July, they're following similarly the patterns of track in and track out as they have in the past.
That is correct. Really, when you look at the track out periods, the first 3 track out periods, which would normally be a 3-week track out, have been reduced to 2 weeks. So that's where we were able to compress most of that month that we've lost by compressing those first 2 track out periods down from 3 weeks to 2 weeks.
Okay, well it is such a complicated calendar, so we appreciate that work. And can you also again restate for traditional calendar what the calendar day is? It's the first time we've used that. It's simply a day off that's going to be held for weather makeup? Is that a way to interpret what a calendar day is for traditional calendar?
That would be that you have hit the nail right on the head there. So as we needed by law to start on August 17th, with the intent of not changing the end date for our calendar, as we worked through the implementing the various session law requirements, it turned out, and I hate to say that there's a benefit to this for one of our calendars, but it did enable us to build those 2, what we're calling calendar out, because we didn't want to confuse families by calling it track out, because our traditional schools don't have tracks. And so those days, if there is no inclement weather, then they will simply be kind of like a teacher workday, where no one will have to report to work. Should we need an inclement weather day, those would be the first days that we would use, and therefore we wouldn't lose any of our banked time as well as any of our work days. One of the priorities that the calendar committee really tried to establish is we know that next year is going to be more challenging, more difficult with all of the new elements that will be worked into the school year. So we worked really hard to try to protect the teacher work days that were already board approved in the calendar, because we know that teachers are going to be putting forth continued extra effort as they are now. So we worked really hard to protect those work days. So to be able to add those 2 calendar days or calendar out days, what that did was allowed us to protect additional teacher work days from being lost to inclement weather.
Oh, thank you. Outstanding. I was glad to see that November 3rd, Election Day, is a work day for 2 calendars and then remote learning for the multi-track. So thank you for paying attention to that, to the committee. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Mr. Fletcher.
I'm just amazed at what the legislature determines in its wisdom makes sense for LEAs to use in operating their schools. And I want to get some clarification, probably from the superintendent or perhaps from Dr. Martin. It's my understanding that the 5 remote learning days have been added to the instructional time required. Is that correct? They're not replacement days. They are additional days of instruction that must be delivered with remote instruction, however that's done. Is that correct?
Well, it's not exactly like that. What the 5 remote learning days are to be incorporated as a part of the district's adopted calendar for meeting the 1,025 hours of instruction. So the 5 remote learning days are a part of your adopted calendar. And then on top of that, there are 5 additional distinct days that must be added to whatever your adopted calendar is. For traditional calendar, the legislature told us when that would happen by telling us that we would start the week of August 17th. That's when they added those 5 days. But for the other calendars, we had to find them.
So then teachers have lost 5 work days.
Correct.
That have been turned into instructional days. Has their compensation changed?
It's still 215-day work calendars for staff, so that hasn't changed.
All right. Now, are there any restrictions on the use of remote learning out of this legislation?
Well, so remote learning will be kind of like what we're doing now, the online learning from home on those 5 days. And I will go ahead and say that the legislation has limited the use of remote learning days to 5 in next year's calendar. That is what's currently in the legislation. And the 2 circumstances under which additional remote learning days would be added are if we continue under a state of emergency or if there is a need due to weather, which could happen in hurricane season or in the winter. And I think there are a lot of questions also from parents in the chat box right now about not the when, but the how and what. What will school look like when we come back in? We believe that school will need to look different. We believe that there's going to have to be options for families and staff based on what the data is showing and in line with what the Department of Health and Human Services might say or what the CDC is putting out. There are several work groups at the state level that are working on what this guidance will look like. I believe that there's supposed to be an update sometime this week, perhaps from the Department of Health and Human Services with some language about what school openings could look like. But we do need to pay attention to the fact that we may need to do school differently. We need to pay attention to the needs of our families and our staff that may not support with a normal return to school as we have had in the past. And yet we need to find ways to continue teaching and learning. So there's still a lot of work in front of us.
As we have a history of doing, student safety comes first.
Yes.
With our staff right closely behind. And I expect that will continue to be a our first concern as we determine how to open school. And I'm frustrated by the fact that we have not much clarity from the state at this point. I had occasion to look at some of the information that I think was probably provided to the state superintendent's task force, although I'm not absolutely certain. There was a 50-page document from Missouri about how to reopen schools, and I'm not sure there was really that much. Well, I was unimpressed with any short clarity about what we need to do. A lot of theory, but not much practicality in terms of how do we actually engage 162,000 students in a timely manner every morning to conduct schools. So I'm very much hopeful that the state will give us what they believe are the right guidelines so we can make decisions about what to do locally. I understand you have that concern as well.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear Superintendent Moore mentioning and acknowledging that many people are concerned about the how. A lot of the questions around calendar definitely include, what is this going to look like? And I thank you for acknowledging that, because that is what a lot of the questions are centered around right now. And Mr. Martin, if you could help me better understand, when we look at the when we look at the multi-track year-round schedules and the remote learning days are occurring on those teacher work days, I know that remote learning right now for most everyone includes office hours or includes teacher availability to help students facilitate answers, help them gain access to their lessons. And so I was curious what teacher workdays are going to look like for our multi-track educators.
Sure, and I can speak to that to some degree, and I think Dr. McFarland and his academics team, as they continue to work and develop what remote learning is going to look like next year, will probably be able to tease that out a little bit more as we get further down that road. So I'll speak to you from my experience as a high school principal. So as a school principal, you typically work with your school improvement team, your leadership team, to identify days within the calendar that are considered to be protected teacher work days and those that are unprotected. So on an unprotected teacher work day, those are days that staff have the option to take an annual leave day, spend time with their, to take the day off. Protected teacher work days are days where staff cannot use annual leave days, but obviously, much like an instructional day, if someone is sick, then they would take a sick day. So I think our intent of looking at this, knowing that we have some flexibility, a little more flexibility with where we place our teacher work days with the year-round calendar because of the compressed number of days, I feel pretty certain that school staffs and their leadership teams will be able to position those protected teacher work days during the days that remote learning is occurring. That way, staff will be available to continue to support students synchronously or through office hours and engage with dialogue with their students and families to support that remote learning during those 5 remote learning days. So that is our hope, but that will really be managed and facilitated at each respective school as they work with their school improvement team and leadership team to identify what days they're going to designate as protected teacher work days.
Okay, I certainly appreciate that. I just know that those days have been valuable for educators to collaborate with each other and also to get additional training for different types of curriculum. And, I know they're very valuable, and so I'm glad to hear that the protecting part will be focused on. And the other question I had, you were mentioning the committee members for the calendar committee. I know in the past in the calendar committee, and I understand this was a different sort of an emergency preparation, but I know that there had been teachers and parents and community members, and I was curious if anyone like that had been included for this particular planning.
In our first two initial calendar committee meetings, we were able to, as I indicated, reach out to Kristen Beller to get some representation from Wake County teachers. I know that she's been facilitating regular communication with that group through Wake NCAE. We were not able remotely in the manner that we were working to engage with all of the community partners that we normally do as we work through these calendars. One of the major components of that, I think, and that we feel good about is in at least both of our modified calendar as well as in our traditional calendar, we were able to maintain the work days that had been reserved due to religious holidays, and the feedback the very valuable feedback that we get from all of those community partners as we're looking at where to place our work days appropriately to support all of our families and community members through the district. We have not had to upset that sequence. So our hope was that obviously we will engage, as Mr. Simmons mentioned, in receiving feedback from parents and community members this week as we work to bring you final recommendations for the June 2nd meeting. But our hope was that because we weren't having to move many of the items that had been advocated for and embedded within that calendar that you all had already approved, that we would be able to move forward in a more quick and robust manner to get the board some updated drafts, because we knew that our year-round families really needed to know what was going to happen in July.
Absolutely, and I do appreciate that, and I'm very glad that you've been working with Ms. Beller, and she's great at bringing back feedback from teachers, and but there are many of our teachers are not necessarily members of Wake NCAE. I love the work that they do, but and I appreciate that this is that the feedback from the community and educators is something that's going to be considered over these next few days after these calendar proposals go out. So thank you again for your hard work in that, and those are the questions I had, Chair Sutton.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. So we got two Martins here, a board member, Martin.
Thank you. Again, thank you for the work on the calendar committee. These calendars are absolutely challenging. I'd like to start with a comment of recognition that going from the 17 to 12 teacher work days, technically the number of hours required for the teacher stays the same, but this really means the teachers will be doing more work on their own for no pay. Teachers already do a lot of grading and assignment preparation outside of the regular workday. Those teacher work days were not days off for teachers. So just to acknowledge, I know there's not much we could do about it, but going from the 17 to 12 is really asking teachers to do 5 days of work with no pay. Beyond that acknowledgement, a question I have with respect to the remote learning days. We've had this idea come up, in past years when there's inclement weather. Is there a way that, if there's inclement weather, we could call that a remote learning day? I recognize that that doesn't have the same ability to do long-term planning for a remote learning day, but people have gained a lot of experience in the remote learning. So could we, instead of just always having a makeup day, if we have inclement weather, let that day be declared one of the remote learning days, and then one of the scheduled remote learning days could actually, just fill in as a regular class day. So can we use remote learning days to deal with inclement weather?
So let me take a tackle at that, Dr. Martin. So I'll start actually with the first half. So when the legislators were reaching out about what kinds of needs we might have for next year, and the subject of additional days with students came up, I will tell you that every time that conversation came up, superintendents stressed that additional days required additional funding for the teachers and the staff that support schools. So when the legislature came back with a calendar requirement that didn't pay teachers anymore for those additional days and took it out of the work days, that was quite disappointing.
Absolutely.
And then to the second part of your day, second part of your comment, it is absolutely our intention to see if the legislation allows us to do so. And we feel that we've got a good handle on it, and we've certainly had the trial by fire these last couple of months. Instead of having to make up a weather day to turn it into a remote learning day, if we are able to do that, we are certainly exploring that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mahaffey, did you have another question?
I did. I had a few things come up in listening. And in regards to remote learning days, I know the first week of remote learning, we had some areas of the county that had power outages. So I'm a little hesitant if we have inclement weather, which can sometimes be severe in North Carolina, if that's the be-all, end-all for using a remote learning day, because we will have students who maybe don't have power, which would make it a little difficult. Questions that I had, I noticed on the year-round calendar, the end of the quarter is not listed. I know that's helpful for teachers to see when the end of the quarter is so they can think about report cards. If we could get the cue for end of quarter for our track outs, before track outs, that would be helpful. And then other questions I have in regards to just calendar and reopening in general are what professional development would look like for teachers, especially given the remote learning days that are put in the calendar. What are we looking at? I've had a lot of questions from parents of immunocompromised students wondering what school will look like for their child, and asking if there are going to be distance learning measures available for them, and what absences are going to be looking like. These are questions I know we don't necessarily have the answer to now, but just ones that have come up, and I wanted to make sure to share them perhaps for a next update. Thank you.
Thank you.
And those are all working scenarios that staff is looking at. So, and they will be provided as an update. And a lot of those are also areas where some guidance from the state is going to be very helpful and critical to moving those scenarios forward. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Ms. Mahaffey, I will certainly get the cues added to that year-round calendar.
Sorry. Mr. Fletcher, did you have another question?
I did, and I remembered to unmute my mic this time. Just going back to the question of teacher work days and protected teacher work days, is there an expectation of how many of these work days are protected and how many are not? Is there a normal? I guess that's for Mr. Martin or the superintendent.
Yeah. There is some guidance on that, and I'm not sure that I've got it off the top of my head. Do you, Wade? Because there's.
I do not.
Yeah.
I know that there's a range that is provided, and then it's each school works with their school, and that's a part of that school improvement process as they plan. So there is a range, and I certainly will have that information for the next work session as we talk about calendars.
Thank you. My concern is that if the calendar law may say that teachers are going to be available to do remote learning, but the employment law may say they have permission to not be in school on a remote learning day. And in that situation, we're looking at substitutes and other. Am I misreading the conflict between these two statutes, or is that a possibility that teachers would take a work day that they've earned instead of doing distance learning?
Yes, that is correct. Your interpretation of those statutes is correct. We are charged with maintaining hours of instruction. That is why when we have, whether it's remote learning or inclement weather, we make up time to make sure that we meet the number of hours that are lost. But when a remote learning day is scheduled on a day that is available for a teacher to take leave, then we may have an issue where we need to work through that. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. We get more help from the state.
Thank you, sir. Superintendent Moore, are there any further updates or comments as part of COVID-19 update?
We do not have any additional.
Okay. Any closing comments or thoughts from you?
I would just say that this continues to be evolving. We know that there will be guidance that comes out and it will be further refined as we get further along, and that data will continue to inform decisions that's being made at the school level. But school systems really are in a position right now where the ability to make some decisions and work some scenarios out about, we've given you calendars. There's a possibility those calendars might change depending on what happens with the different phases of reopening in the state. But that is our best estimate right now that adheres to the law that was recently passed by the legislatures. But the decisions about what school will look like, whether or not we will be having to follow social distancing guidelines, do we need to have staggered attendance, do we need to provide a more robust remote learning experience for families who might choose it, or for staff members who might need it. Those are all questions that are part of the scenarios that we are working, where we do need some guidance on what we're able to do as we move forward and what's expected of us, quite frankly. So stay tuned, I guess is what I'd say.
Thank you for that. And I do want all of our participants to know that these calendars are not being voted on in tonight's meeting. They're not part of our agenda, so we do have some time to review comments, solicit feedback. As it was mentioned, we will have a link to share those comments and feedback on the website. If you don't see those or have those, do feel free to share those with your board member. But we hope that will be up so that we will have all those comments and feedback in one central location. At this time, we thank you for your patience. Thank you for all those. We apologize for those who could not get on. Please look for that information. And we thank you all for joining. We will now switch to our public meeting. So we will log off, board members. Remember the link to get to our 5:30 public meeting. And we'll see everyone there who plans to join in just a few. Thank you again for joining us today for our work session. This concludes that meeting.